As police commissioner, chief constable, senior officers up and down the land wrestle with the issues of violent Britain, of violent England and Northern Ireland, what might the way forward be? Well, let's turn to Sir Paul Stephenson, who was chief constable of Lancashire Constabulary and also served as commissioner of the Metropolitan Police as well, and joins me now. Good to see you again, Sir Paul. I trust you and everybody as well. All right, nationally, we know where we are and we know where we want to get to. How are we going to achieve it? Morning to you.
Oh, goodness. Well, good morning. Good morning, Nick. That's a pretty tough question, isn't it? Particularly for someone who's been so long retired and out of the game, thankfully, so I might say at this moment in time. We need the things that many people have spoken about. It's sort of intelligence that's timely, accurate and comprehensive, a rapid response by experienced, trained and well-led officers, and a fully resourced criminal justice system that's capable of dealing with the product. Some of those things might be partly in place, but it would appear that not all are in place. There's no doubt that, in my mind, that right-wing extremism has been significantly at play here. But we need to remember this is the ugly face of racism. Racism isn't confined to right or left. Most of the thugs who are involved in this couldn't spell right or left, let alone think politically. But there is a right breeding ground out there for malevolent actors to put a rabble out sort of on the streets who are going to cause great damage and danger. And that is what's happening at this moment in time.
Neil Basu, another senior police officer who you'll know, or you'll probably know well, has talked of this as an act of violence against people and property with a racial cause designed to intimidate a section of the public, be it Muslims or asylum seekers. Not only does it fit the definition of terrorism, it is terrorism. Is Neil right?
Well, I have a huge amount of respect for Neil, and he's much closer to this than I am. So I respect his opinion. I think we've got to be very careful that we don't overreach with the law, but I do support him in saying if the law is there, let's use it to its full extent. But let's actually produce some results with this. I'm not hugely impressed with politicians using strong phrases to show that they're in charge of the situation, standing army, ramping up CJS, full force of the law. I rather think communities expect the full force of the law to be used against thugs, irrespective of who's motivating them. All the thugs on the streets who are causing this damage, and I include in that all the thugs, people who mistakenly use fictitious banners of protecting communities to come out and cause damage, all of them need to face the full force of the law. But that's something that should be in place 24/7.
So, Paul, last week we were going to have a violent crime disorder unit. Yesterday, as you rightly referenced, it's a standing army. Is it not just the Public Order Mutual Aid Service, or ROCU under another name? We've got these units already.
Well, it is rather interesting you raised that, Nick. Way back in, I think it was 2003, 2004, I produced a paper on behalf of the police service to government, making a number of recommendations to reform our structures in policing. One of them was to seriously deal with our serious organised crime problem, which enhanced the Serious Organised Crime Agency, which subsequently morphed into the National Crime Agency. But the other recommendation, which wasn't taken up, but it was supported by the then Prime Minister and Charles Clarke, the Home Secretary, was to create a smaller number of strategic forces that had the capability and scale to develop and maintain experience for the big ticket issues, counter-terrorism, serious organised crime, and of course public disorder. That would have left small forces in place to deal with the municipal and the neighbourhood policing issues and directly accountable to local authorities. It was blocked by the Treasury at the time, and the subsequent government went down another route, creating police and crime commissioners. I'm not too sure that's improved the situation at all. I'm not too sure it's improved the national capability. It would appear not. And perhaps it's time to dig that paper out again and look at the structure of policing. Trying to restructure policing in the heat of the moment will end up making huge mistakes. We do need to have a longer-term conversation about this, about what structure of policing should be going forward to deal with the problems that we've got.
How helpful or otherwise are expressions such as standing armies?
Well, I get it, Nick. I understand that politicians have to make strong statements, and at this moment, we do need to stand strong, and we do need to stand up to these thugs. But on a personal basis, I'm not impressed by it. I will be impressed by seeing the politicians continuing to support the police in the very difficult job that they do. That's not always been the case in the past, has it?
One of the allegations being levelled at the current commissioner and chief constables up and down the land is so-called two-tier policing. Do you recognise that, Sir Paul?
I'm so far distant from policing. I'm not entirely sure I can add to the debate usefully. But the problem is, as soon as we create an atmosphere where those questions can be raised, then that allows sort of the malevolent actors to exploit it and create a disturbance within our communities that we don't need.
But to those who point, and an area you know well in London, the first wave of pro-Palestinian demonstrations immediately after the October 7 attacks on Israel, there are, and I think even Sir Marcus conceded things could have been done differently. Was it policing too light touch then?
I'm always loath to criticise police. I know how difficult it is to lead the Met, and I know how difficult it is for the cops on the streets. But from a distance, it didn't look comfortable at all.
What of people such as Elon Musk saying the country is heading for civil war? How difficult does that make the job of Sir Mark and obviously chief constables up and down the land?
Well, it doesn't make it any easier, does it? We've been used to statements coming from ill-informed people outside of this country that don't make the job of leading the country or leading policing any easier. I think we need to concentrate here and now on the problems that we've got and the solutions we can offer, and do whatever we can to persuade people like Musk and other people in the States or elsewhere to concentrate on their own problems and not try and create further problems for us.
You mentioned some politicians, if I can point you in other directions. The language of some in the recent weeks or months. Lee Anderson from the Reform Party suggesting a GMP officer deserved a medal after being seen to kick someone in the head at Manchester Airport. And Nigel Farage saying we weren't being told something when it came to the attack of last week's details of last week's Southport attack. Initially suggesting that the person who's going before the courts had been the subject of some form of intelligence agency work. Again, how helpful is that?
Well, I'll respond to the question in the way you're leading me. It's unhelpful. Full stop.
All right, we go to other matters. You have sat in on COBRA meetings. What makes a COBRA meeting effective?
I really don't know. Sometimes COBRAs, it seems to me, are called so that politicians can be seen to be doing something. And I get that. I fully understand it. A clear focus on what the problem is, bringing to the table the right experts, ensuring that the intelligence that's informing the political and the operational decisions is timely, accurate and comprehensive, and then having the resources to put it into effect. These are all truisms, but that's what makes any meeting, and certainly a meeting like COBRA, effective.
Apart from a couple of weeks of sustained rain, the like of which normally comes to Old Trafford when England are going to win the Ashes, apart from that, what is going to calm everything down, Sir Paul?
Well, we shouldn't forget, and I don't minimise what's going on, this is appalling thuggery and racism, and we should call it out for what it is, a racism on our streets. But we should remember that racism isn't confined to left or right, as I pointed out earlier. But we have a history in this country going back centuries of riots on the streets. Undoubtedly, the police will do their job. A different structure may help, and a longer-term thinking about policing should be structured may help in the future. But at the moment, supporting the cops to ensure that they do the job and making sure the criminal justice system, creaky though it might be, responds in a timely and appropriate manner.
Would you ever support the use of water cannon?
If it's appropriate, yes, I would. But I'm not entirely sure it's the right discussion, because it doesn't seem to me that our street structure and various other constraints would make it particularly helpful. It's also a very unwieldy piece of equipment. It's a diversion, Nick. It's not really a serious consideration at this moment in time.
Last couple of questions. You'll know, if we go back to the events that sparked this unrest just over a week ago, both the police and the media are governed by restrictions that date back to the 1930s and were last amended in the 1980s about what you can say about a suspect. And people sought to exploit that and maximise that, hence the lie that became that he was an asylum seeker, a Muslim asylum seeker who'd come across the channel. When I tell you the police have confirmed A grandmother was not murdered by Somali migrants after far-right agitators spread the, quotes, dangerous misinformation online. Suffolk police moved quickly to stop the falsehoods about the death of the woman after they were shared on social media. So, Paul, we now have social media. We have seen the dangers that it can inflame. I'm not saying you should immediately name everyone, but there needs to be a quicker or swifter process, doesn't there?
Well, of course, sort of making laws, changing laws in the heat of this particular crisis would not be a smart thing to do, but we do need to have a longer term conversation. Legislation that dates back to the 1930s is hardly likely to fit into a 2024 society where we have huge developments and a social media that is capable of creating great disturbance and fear within our communities. So, of course, there needs to be a longer conversation about that.
And on that, in the aftermath of the 2011 London riots, it was discovered the Met considered shutting down Twitter to try and stop the riots, to stop tensions being inflamed. What do you think the role of social media has had in the last 7 days we've witnessed across much of the country?
Well, again, Nick, remember, I'm distant from it all, and I have no access to any intelligence, or perhaps some might say even knowledge about these matters. But looking from afar, it has clearly had it's had a significant effect, and it is a significant weapon that can be misused by the malicious actors, both within state and outside state.
Final question. In all the times I met you and some testy questions I put to you, you, as I recall, never knocked a microphone out of my hand. What did you make of Sir Mark yesterday?
I've absolutely no idea of what's going on there, and it's not something I would even dream of commenting on. He's got a heck of a job to do, and I support him in doing that job. And it seems to me he's been doing a pretty damn good job so far.
Doesn't set a great example, though, does it, Paul?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what went on, Nick. I mean, perhaps you are better informed than I am, but I wasn't there. I haven't seen the media, and I've only read what I've read in the newspaper this morning.
Best wishes to you and your family. Thank you for coming on. Sir Paul Stephenson served as Chief Constable of Lancashire Constabulary, other posts, and then was Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police.